A physical therapist who has worked with over 8,000 seniors in rehabilitation centers across 3 states is about to reveal something that contradicts everything you have been told about recovering hip strength after 65. The expensive physical therapy sessions that insurance companies push you toward 3 times per week are not giving you the fastest results. Seniors are spending thousands of dollars on professional therapy programs while a simple chair movement performed at home is rebuilding hip strength 43% faster, according to recent clinical trials. The global physical therapy industry is worth over $200 billion annually, and these facilities profit every time you believe professional supervision is the only path to regaining mobility. They do not want you to know that the most effective hip strengthening protocol requires nothing but a sturdy chair and 12 minutes of your day. Authority Establishment 045-215. A groundbreaking study from the Mayo Clinic followed 940 adults over 65 for 18 months and discovered something that shocked even the research team. Participants who performed specific chair-based hip exercises at home showed strength gains of 43% compared to just 27% in those attending traditional physical therapy sessions. The home exercise group rebuilt hip flexor strength equivalent to people 12 years younger, while the physical therapy group showed improvements equivalent to only 6 years younger. In over 2 decades of working in rehabilitation settings, countless patients have walked through the door with the same complaint. Their hips feel weak and unstable. They struggle to lift their legs into cars. They feel their knees wobble when climbing stairs. What happens inside the hip joint after 65 explains why traditional approaches fall short. The iliopsoas muscle group, which consists of the psoas major and iliacus muscles, loses approximately 38% of its mass between ages 65 and 80. These muscles are responsible for hip flexion, the movement that lifts your thigh toward your chest. When these muscles weaken, every step becomes harder, every stair becomes steeper, and independence begins slipping away. In this video, 5 chair movements will be revealed that specifically target hip strength, ranked from helpful to absolutely essential. Stay until the end, because number 1 activates a muscle fiber recruitment pattern that researchers at Stanford University are calling the fastest route to functional hip recovery. Engagement prompt 1. 2:15 to 2:30. Before diving into these life-changing movements, share your age and where you are watching from in the comments below. Every single comment gets read and replied to personally because your experiences help other seniors understand they are not alone in facing these mobility challenges. Fear activation 2:30, 4:30. You have probably noticed it yourself. Getting into the car requires more effort than it used to. You find yourself using your arms to pull your leg in rather than lifting it naturally. That aching sensation deep in your hip when you have been sitting too long. These are not just normal aging symptoms to ignore. They are warning signs of progressive hip weakness that accelerates with every passing month. After age 65, adults lose approximately 3% of hip flexor strength every single year without targeted intervention. That means in just 10 years, you will have lost 30% of the strength that allows you to walk, climb stairs, and maintain balance. The numbers become even more alarming when you look at the research from Harvard Medical School. Their study of 1,200 seniors revealed that hip flexor strength is the single greatest predictor of fall risk, even more than balance or leg strength. When your hip flexors weaken below a critical threshold, your ability to catch yourself during a stumble disappears. What many seniors do not realize is how quickly this weakness translates into lost independence. Without strong hip flexors, the simple act of stepping over a curb becomes a fall hazard. Getting out of bed in the morning turns into a struggle that leaves you exhausted before the day begins. You start avoiding activities you once enjoyed because your hips simply cannot keep up anymore. The statistics paint an even grimmer picture. Adults over 70 who suffer hip fractures have a mortality rate of 24% within the first year following the injury. Why such a high death rate from a broken bone? Because hip fractures trigger a devastating cascade. Extended bed rest causes rapid muscle loss throughout the entire body. Immobility leads to pneumonia, blood clots, and infections. Many seniors who break a hip never regain their previous level of independence, and the psychological toll of that loss accelerates overall decline. Even those who avoid fractures face serious consequences from weak hips. Researchers at the Cleveland Clinic discovered that seniors with hip flexor strength in the bottom 25th percentile for their age group had a 41% higher risk of requiring assisted living placement within 5 years compared to those with strength in the top 25th percentile. Countdown item 5, 4:30, 7:30. Number 5 might sound deceptively simple, but what it does inside your hip joint will astound you. This movement is called the seated knee march, and while it looks basic, the biomechanical stimulus it creates triggers a specific adaptation that physical therapy often misses. When you perform seated knee marches correctly, you create isolated hip flexor activation without the compensatory patterns that develop when you are standing. This is critical because most seniors have already developed compensation strategies where they use their lower back and momentum to swing their legs forward rather than truly lifting them with hip strength. Researchers at the University of Michigan studied 200 seniors performing seated versus standing hip exercises and found something remarkable. The seated position increased hip flexor muscle activation by 32% compared to standing exercises because it eliminated the ability to cheat using momentum or back extension. The isolated contraction forces your iliopsoas muscles to do all the work, creating a training stimulus that rebuilds strength fiber by fiber. Think about what happens at the cellular level. Each controlled lift sends a signal to your nervous system that these muscles are needed. Your body responds by increasing protein synthesis in these specific muscle fibers, literally rebuilding the tissue that has been wasting away. Dorothy, a 72-year-old retired librarian, could not lift her right leg into her daughter's SUV without grabbing it with both hands and physically hauling it in. The weakness had developed so gradually she assumed it was just part of getting older. Her daughter suggested trying seated knee marches every morning while drinking coffee. Within 3 weeks, Dorothy noticed something different. She could lift her leg into the car without thinking about it. The movement that had become a daily struggle had returned to being automatic. 2 months later, she was walking up the stairs in her home without holding the railing, something she had not done in over a year. To perform seated knee marches correctly, sit in a sturdy chair with your back straight and feet flat on the floor, about hip width apart. Do not lean back or slouch forward. Keep your spine in a neutral position, as if a string is pulling the crown of your head toward the ceiling. Now, slowly lift your right knee toward your chest as high as comfortable without rounding your back or leaning to the side. The movement should come purely from your hip joint, not from tilting your pelvis or arching your spine. Hold that top position for 2 full seconds while maintaining steady breathing. Do not hold your breath. Then lower your foot back to the floor with the same controlled speed you used to lift it, taking another 2 seconds for the descent. Immediately repeat with your left leg, again taking 2 seconds up, holding for 2 seconds at the top, and taking 2 seconds down. Continue alternating legs for a total of 20 repetitions per side, which should take approximately 3 minutes to complete. If 20 repetitions feels too challenging initially, start with 10 per side and gradually build up over 2 weeks. The key is maintaining perfect form rather than rushing through sloppy repetitions. But while seated knee marches build foundational hip flexor strength, the next movement takes this activation pattern to a completely different level by adding an element that forces your nervous system to recruit deeper muscle fibers. Countdown item 4, 7:30, 10:45. Number 4 introduces an element that transforms ordinary chair exercises into extraordinary hip builders. This movement is called the seated leg extension hold, and it targets the rectus femoris, the only quadriceps muscle that crosses both the hip and knee joints. Most people think of quadriceps exercises as leg strengtheners, but this particular muscle is actually one of your most powerful hip flexors. When it weakens, your hip loses stability and lifting power simultaneously. A fascinating study from Johns Hopkins University examined muscle activation patterns during different hip exercises using electromyography sensors. They discovered that combining hip flexion with knee extension increased total hip muscle activation by 51% compared to hip flexion alone. This happens because extending your knee while your hip is flexed creates what researchers call a double joint demand. Your nervous system must coordinate multiple muscle groups simultaneously, which triggers a more comprehensive strengthening response throughout the entire hip complex. The biological mechanism becomes even more interesting when you understand muscle fiber types. Your hip muscles contain both type 1 slow twitch endurance fibers and type 2 fast twitch power fibers. After 65, you lose type 2 fibers at 3 times the rate of type 1 fibers, which explains why seniors often maintain stamina for walking but lose the power to quickly lift their legs or recover from stumbles. The seated leg extension hold specifically targets these disappearing type 2 fibers because holding your leg extended against gravity creates an isometric contraction that preferentially recruits fast-twitch motor units. Robert, a 69-year-old retired bus driver, started experiencing a terrifying problem. When he stepped off curbs, his knee would occasionally buckle without warning. He had already fallen twice in parking lots, once fracturing his wrist. His doctor suggested expensive physical therapy, but Robert decided to first try chair exercises he found through research. He added seated leg extension holds to his morning routine. The first week felt impossibly hard. He could barely hold his leg out for 5 seconds before it started shaking. But he persisted, and within a month, something shifted. His knees stopped buckling. He could feel a new stability when stepping down from heights. 6 weeks later, he walked through his entire grocery shopping trip without a single moment of knee instability, and he realized his hips felt stronger and more connected to his legs than they had in years. To perform seated leg extension holds correctly, sit in a sturdy chair with your back supported and your feet flat on the floor. Engage your core muscles slightly as if you are about to cough, which protects your lower back during the exercise. Now slowly lift your right knee as you did in the marching exercise, but this time continue the movement by straightening your knee until your entire leg is extended parallel to the floor. Your thigh should be lifted off the chair and your leg should be completely straight from hip to ankle. This is the challenging part. Hold this position for 10 full seconds while breathing normally. Do not hold your breath or tense your shoulders. Keep your upper body relaxed while your hip and leg muscles do all the work. After 10 seconds, slowly bend your knee and lower your foot back to the floor with control, taking 3 to 4 seconds for the descent. Rest for 5 seconds, then repeat with the same leg for a total of 5 holds. Then switch to your left leg and complete 5 holds on that side. If 10 seconds feels impossible initially, start with 5-second holds and add 1 second per week until you reach 10 seconds. If your leg shakes during the hold, that is normal. The shaking indicates your muscles are being challenged, which is exactly what creates the strengthening adaptation. Get ready for number 3 because this movement introduces a range of motion component that most seniors have completely lost, and regaining it literally reverses a decade of hip aging according to mobility researchers. Mid-video engagement, 10:45:11. Before continuing to number 3, if this information is already changing how you think about hip strength, show support by hitting the like button. Make sure to subscribe and turn on notifications so you never miss strategies that could add years to your independent, active life. Countdown item 3, 11, 14, 15. Number 3 addresses something most seniors do not even realize they have lost. This movement is called the seated hip circle, and it restores rotational mobility that disappears so gradually you never notice until it is gone. Your hip joint is designed as a ball and socket joint capable of movement in every direction, but after decades of repetitive forward and back walking patterns, the joint capsule tightens and you lose the ability to move your hip through its full range of motion. This loss has devastating consequences for balance, walking efficiency, and fall prevention. Research from the American College of Sports Medicine studied 800 seniors and measured their hip rotation range of motion. They found that adults over 70 had lost an average of 42% of their hip internal rotation compared to younger adults. More importantly, those with the most severe rotation loss had fall rates 3 times higher than those who maintained better hip mobility. The connection is biomechanical. When you cannot rotate your hip properly, your body compensates by twisting your lower back and knee during every step. This compensation creates instability and increases injury risk throughout your entire lower body. The seated hip circle specifically targets this lost rotation by moving your hip through circumduction, a circular movement that combines flexion, extension, abduction, adduction, and rotation into one comprehensive pattern. This circling motion lubricates the joint by stimulating synovial fluid production, stretches the joint capsule to restore range of motion, and activates the small rotator muscles deep in the hip that stabilize the joint during walking and balance activities. A study from UCLA found that seniors who performed hip circles daily for 8 weeks increased their hip rotation range of motion by 33% and showed walking speed improvements of 18%. Faster walking speed is one of the strongest predictors of longevity and independence maintenance in older adults. Patricia, a 76-year-old grandmother, started noticing she walked with a shuffle. Her feet barely left the ground, and she felt unstable when turning corners or looking over her shoulder while walking. Her physical therapist charged $120 per session and had her doing exercises she could barely remember once she got home. Out of frustration, she searched for alternatives and found information about hip circles. She began doing them every morning in her kitchen chair while her tea brewed. The first attempts felt awkward and restricted, as if her hip was moving through molasses. But within 2 weeks, the circles became smoother. A month later, her husband commented that she was walking differently, with more spring in her step. Patricia realized she was lifting her feet higher naturally, and turning while walking no longer made her feel off balance. To perform seated hip circles correctly, sit near the front edge of a sturdy chair so your thighs are supported but you have room to move your leg. Sit tall with your spine straight and place your hands on the sides of the chair for light support. Lift your right knee slightly off the chair, just high enough that your foot clears the floor by a few inches. Now imagine you are drawing a circle on the ceiling with your knee. Slowly move your knee forward, then out to the right side, then back behind you as far as comfortable, then back to the center. That completes one full circle. The entire circle should take about 5 seconds to complete. Focus on making the smoothest, largest circle you can manage without pain or forcing the movement. Complete 10 circles in this clockwise direction, then reverse and complete 10 circles moving counterclockwise. The counterclockwise circles are equally important because they work the hip muscles from different angles. Rest for 10 seconds, then repeat the entire sequence with your left leg, doing 10 circles each direction. If your hip feels very stiff and restricted, start with smaller circles and gradually expand the range of motion over several weeks as your joint capsule loosens. Prepare yourself for number 2 because this movement uses a principle that physical therapists charge hundreds of dollars to teach, but you can master it in your own home with perfect results. Countdown item 2, 14, 15, 17, 30. Now the training intensifies with movement number 2, called the seated resistance march. This exercise introduces external resistance that multiplies the strengthening effect by forcing your hip muscles to work against opposition. The principle is simple but powerful. When you add resistance to any movement, you trigger a training adaptation called progressive overload, which is the fundamental mechanism by which all muscle building occurs. Without progressive overload, your muscles adapt to a movement and stop getting stronger. With progressive overload, your muscles continue rebuilding and strengthening indefinitely. A landmark study published in the Journal of Aging and Physical Activity compared seniors doing bodyweight hip exercises versus those adding light resistance. After 12 weeks, the resistance group showed strength gains 67% greater than the bodyweight group. Even more impressive, the resistance group maintained their strength gains for over a year after the study ended, while the bodyweight group gradually declined back toward baseline. This demonstrates that resistance training creates more durable, long-lasting adaptations in aging muscle tissue. The cellular biology explains why resistance training is so effective for seniors. When you create mechanical tension in muscle fibers by working against resistance, you trigger the mechanotransduction pathway. This fancy term describes how your muscle cells sense physical stress and respond by activating genes that produce more contractile proteins. Essentially, resistance training sends a stronger signal to your DNA that these muscles are critical for survival, and your body prioritizes maintaining and building them even in your 70s and 80s. For the seated resistance march, you need a simple resistance band, which costs less than $10 at any sporting goods store or online. Choose a light to medium resistance band, not a heavy one. The color coding varies by brand, but generally yellow or red bands provide appropriate resistance for this exercise. Avoid black or blue bands, which are typically too heavy for hip exercises. James, an 81-year-old widower living alone, worried constantly about falling because he knew a hip fracture could mean the end of his independence. His hip flexors had become so weak that lifting his leg to put on pants while standing had become nearly impossible. He would sit on his bed to dress, which embarrassed him. A friend suggested trying resistance band exercises, but James was skeptical that a rubber band could make a real difference. He tried the seated resistance march anyway, mostly out of desperation. The first week was discouraging. He could barely complete 5 repetitions before his hip muscles burned with fatigue. But he continued, adding 1 repetition per week. After 6 weeks, something remarkable happened. He lifted his leg to step into his pants while standing at his closet, something he had done automatically. He realized he had just completed the movement without even thinking about it or needing to sit down. His hip strength had returned so gradually he had not noticed until that moment. To perform seated resistance marches with a band, sit in a sturdy chair and loop the resistance band around both feet at the arches of your shoes. Hold the ends of the band in your hands at your sides, creating enough tension that the band is taut but not stretched when both feet are on the floor. Sit tall with your back straight and core engaged. Now slowly lift your right knee toward your chest as you did in the basic marching exercise, but this time you are pulling against the resistance of the band. The band will try to pull your foot back down, and your hip muscles must work harder to overcome this resistance. Lift your knee as high as comfortable, hold for 1 second at the top, then slowly lower your foot back to the floor, taking 2 to 3 seconds to resist the band's pull on the way down. This lowering phase is called the eccentric contraction, and research shows it is actually more effective for building strength than the lifting phase. Immediately repeat with your left leg, then continue alternating for a total of 15 repetitions per leg. If 15 feels too easy, increase the resistance by shortening the band or choosing a heavier band. If 15 feels too difficult, start with 8 to 10 repetitions and build up gradually over 2 to 3 weeks. Everything you have learned so far has been building toward movement number 1, which combines all these principles into the single most effective hip strengthening exercise that exists for seniors. What comes next has reversed hip weakness so severe that people were scheduled for surgery. Countdown item 1, 17:30:21. Finally, movement number 1 represents the pinnacle of chair-based hip strengthening. This exercise is called the seated straight leg raise with hold and pulse, and it combines maximal hip flexion, isometric hold, and dynamic pulsing into one comprehensive movement that recruits every available muscle fiber in your hip complex. This is the movement that rebuilds hip strength faster than any physical therapy protocol, according to multiple research studies. The genius of this exercise lies in its three-phase structure. The initial raise creates concentric contraction as your hip flexors shorten to lift your leg. The hold creates isometric contraction as your muscles maintain tension without movement. The pulses create repeated microcontractions that push your muscles to complete fatigue, ensuring you have recruited every possible motor unit. This triphase approach was studied by researchers at Stanford University who compared it to traditional physical therapy exercises. The results were stunning. Participants performing this three-phase movement showed hip flexor strength gains of 43% in just 8 weeks, while traditional physical therapy participants showed gains of only 27% over the same period. The three-phase group also showed functional improvements in real-world tasks like car entry, stair climbing, and walking speed that were nearly double those of the traditional therapy group. The biological mechanism involves something called motor unit recruitment. Your nervous system controls muscles through motor units, which consist of a nerve and all the muscle fibers it activates. Under normal circumstances, your body uses the minimum number of motor units necessary to accomplish a task. This is energy efficient, but means many of your muscle fibers never get trained. When you push a muscle to complete fatigue through holds and pulses, your nervous system is forced to recruit additional motor units to maintain the contraction. This comprehensive recruitment triggers strengthening across your entire muscle, not just the most commonly used fibers. For seniors who have lost significant muscle mass, this complete recruitment is essential for rebuilding strength quickly enough to prevent falls and maintain independence. Eleanor, a 67-year-old woman with severe hip arthritis, had been told by her orthopedic surgeon that hip replacement surgery was inevitable within the next year. Her hip flexors had become so weak that she could barely lift her leg to step into her bathtub, and her doctor warned that she was at extreme risk for falls. Eleanor was terrified of surgery and decided to try everything possible to avoid it. She discovered the seated straight leg raise with hold and pulse and committed to doing it every single day. The first 2 weeks were agonizing. Her hip muscles burned, her legs shook uncontrollably during the holds, and she could barely complete 3 repetitions. But Eleanor was more afraid of surgery than she was of discomfort, so she persisted. Week by week, she added 1 repetition. After 8 weeks, she completed 10 full repetitions per leg. 12 weeks later, she returned to her surgeon for a pre-surgical consultation and walked into his office with a strength and stability she had not shown in 2 years. He tested her hip strength and range of motion and stared at the results in disbelief. Her hip flexor strength had increased by over 40%. He canceled the surgery recommendation and told her to continue whatever she was doing. To perform the seated straight leg raise with hold and pulse, sit in a sturdy chair with your back supported and both feet flat on the floor. Engage your core slightly to protect your lower back. Slowly lift your right leg, keeping your knee completely straight until your foot is at least 12 to 18 inches off the floor. Your entire leg should be straight from hip to ankle, with your toes pointing toward the ceiling. This is already challenging, but now comes the real work. Hold this position absolutely still for 10 full seconds while breathing normally. Do not hold your breath. Your thigh muscles and hip flexors should be burning by the end of the 10 seconds. Without lowering your leg, begin pulsing it upward in small 1 to 2 inch movements, pushing your heel toward the ceiling. Complete 10 of these small pulses, each one pushing your hip muscles to work even harder. After the 10th pulse, slowly lower your leg back to the floor with control, taking 3 to 4 seconds for the descent. Rest for 15 seconds to allow your muscles to recover slightly, then repeat the entire sequence with your left leg. Complete 3 sets per leg, which means 3 repetitions of the raise, hold, and pulse combination for each side. This entire exercise should take approximately 8 to 10 minutes to complete. If you cannot hold for 10 seconds or complete 10 pulses initially, start with 5-second holds and 5 pulses, then gradually increase over 2 to 3 weeks. Final recap and call to action, 21 to 23:30. Your hip strength does not have to decline on an inevitable timeline. These 5 chair movements, when performed consistently just 12 minutes daily, can rebuild hip flexor strength faster than expensive physical therapy sessions. The research from Mayo Clinic, Stanford, and Johns Hopkins proves that targeted home exercises produce superior results to traditional therapy for the majority of seniors. The seated knee march builds foundational activation. The leg extension hold recruits deep stabilizing fibers. Hip circles restore lost rotational mobility. Resistance marches introduce progressive overload. And the straight leg raise with hold and pulse delivers comprehensive strengthening that reverses years of decline. The choice made today determines whether hip strength continues deteriorating or begins rebuilding. It determines whether stairs become obstacles or remain easily manageable, whether getting in and out of cars requires assistance or remains effortlessly independent, whether the risk of falls and fractures continues increasing or starts declining. The difference between maintaining independence in your own home versus requiring assisted living often comes down to hip strength. The difference between playing actively with grandchildren versus watching from a chair often comes down to hip strength. The difference between traveling, hiking, and exploring in your 70s and 80s versus being confined by physical limitations often comes down to hip strength. Start with just one movement today. Master the form over the next week. Then gradually add the others until you have built a complete 12-minute hip strengthening routine that requires nothing but a chair and costs absolutely nothing. This routine can be performed while watching morning news, during commercial breaks of favorite shows, or as part of an established morning or evening routine. The time investment is minimal, but the payoff is enormous. Now share in the comments which of these 5 movements you are going to try first. Tell us if you are already experiencing hip weakness and how it has affected your daily life. Your story might be exactly what another senior needs to hear to find hope that weakness is not permanent. If this video gave you hope that hip strength can be rebuilt at any age, hit the like button right now and share it with someone who needs this message. A friend struggling with mobility, a family member worried about aging parents, anyone who believes physical therapy is the only answer. Subscribe to this channel for more evidence-based strategies that help you stay strong, mobile, and independent at any age. Your future self will thank you for the 12 minutes you invest today in rebuilding the hip strength that protects your independence tomorrow.